Welcome to Into the Terminal, episode 39. Today we're going to be talking about deploying a web server on Red Hat Enterprise Linux. The de facto standard for many years for web servers was Apache HTTPD. And so to kick off this episode, we're going to install that package. And so we'll use DNF, do an install tac-y just to accept the defaults, and do HTTPD. So our base image apparently had that installed already. That's awesome. The next thing we need to do is enable the service, and we want it to run both now and survive a reboot. We can do that in one command using systemctl, enable tac now, HTTPD. And then why don't we create a bit of a customized homepage? So the default directory for Apache is in var www html index.html. Now it's pretty easy to add additional web pages and implement things like PHP, but for today we're just going to use a static HTML page with some amazingly formatted HTML. It's basically going to have a body with a header and a paragraph. We'll include some links in the show notes for some quick guides to basic HTML if you want to try this out at home. So now we've got our service running. We also need to make sure that our SE Linux and firewall services are configured correctly as well. We're going to do that with an SES status, or an SE status, I should say. And we notice that SE Linux is enabled, and we're in enforcing mode. And we're using targeted policies. Scott, do we want to check the HTTP and HTTPS ports, or are those included in targeted?
Yeah, well, those are included in targeted. So if we were to list the ports that are available, port 80 and port 443 are in there by default.
Then the only other thing left to check before we have a live and running web page is we need to ensure that the firewall is configured correctly. So we do that with firewall-cmd command and list services. And you notice that we have cockpit, HTTP, and HTTPS open already. If that was not configured on your box, you would just do a firewall-cmd --add -service to open those ports with a -- permanent, and you can do that either by port name or by service. The only thing left is to go ahead.
And I did want to point out that we did add those services before the start of our show. So they were not in there by default. We went ahead and did it. We actually have a whole episode on managing firewall configuration. So if you're interested, you could check that out.
We will have links to that episode in the show notes. Also, check back in a few hours after live edition of the show, because we do add in some extra documentation and chapter markers. So we see that we've got our web server up and running, along with several worker processes. So the only thing left is to just verify that we can get to our web page. And to do that from our command line, we may just use the curl command.
Oh, I actually have another tab open on my browser. I just switched to that.
Oh, awesome. We're getting high tech here on Into the Terminal. As you can see, here is our amazing web page. My first heading, my first paragraph, just like we put in the HTML. And with that, that's a quick look at how to get started with Apache HTTPD. So, hey there, welcome to Into the Terminal, episode 39. I'm your host, Eric the IT Guy Hendricks, and joining me every episode is my esteemed colleague, Mr. Scott McBrien.
Hello.
So we actually got some good feedback from last week's episode that people like the shorter introduction at the top. Just kind of get in, get your hands wet, get your hands dirty, and and going from there. So I think we're going to keep that in the show. Makes it so you can jump in and learn something really quick in less than 4 minutes. So with that said, there's some additional things that we can do with Apache that I think we want to cover before we move on to. We actually have kind of almost a subtopic in today's episode. So why don't we dive back in? And Scott, you wanted to talk about mod SSL.
Sure. So when we installed Apache, we installed the HTTPD daemon, but it doesn't have the SSL implementation included in that package by default. So if we wanted to install port 443 stuff and secure socket layer things, we'd also need to DNF install mod SSL. And bear with me, and maybe an underscore, I can't remember which. Oh, no argument. There we go. So notice that one has already been installed on this box as well. And you can verify that your Apache configuration can do secure socket layer stuff by looking at the configuration files for Apache. The mod SSL RPM includes this ssl.conf file, and that's what adds all of the basic certificates and directories where we store certificates and all that stuff into our Apache configuration. So if you have the ssl.conf, you got it from the mod SSL RPM, and you should be good to go. And you just want to make sure, just like we did with the regular web page content, that our firewall has allowed HTTPS traffic through, because that's what's going to allow port 443 traffic. And as we talked about in the first couple of minutes, the SELinux targeted policy will also allow Apache to do port 443 activities out of the box. So you don't need to mess around with SELinux unless you're trying to do something more exotic.
And to get an SSL certificate, you'd either have to go through a vendor or you could use the Let's Encrypt, which kind of out of the scope for today's episode, but we'll definitely include a link to some guides in the show notes as well.
Yeah, and just to have, rounding out that discussion, there's a lot of stuff around using self-signed certificates. A lot of modern browsers, though, don't like self-signed certificates because they're not able to validate their authenticity. And that's why you would use a certificate authority so that you can have that certificate. The browser can validate that certificate against a third party, the certificate authority that issued it, to verify the identity of your server. If you use self-signed certificates, oftentimes you get that error message about needing to accept the certificate and proceeding to the site even though your browser is telling you not to. So that's why you would use one of those other secure socket layer certificate providers. If you're doing things like internal transmitting of data back and forth between machines, maybe you don't care as much about the identity not being able to be validated against a third-party certificate server.
All right. So we kind of hinted at this. Well, we actually covered the main directory. So the main directory for configurations for Apache is in /etc /httpd or httpd. And then a lot of the content is often found in var www html. So just wanted to call those two out specifically. Let's see.
So this is another point to belabor because of SELinux. So if you take a look at the first SELinux show that we did, one of my rules of the road was put things where we expect it. So if you put things where it's expected, you won't have SELinux stopping you from doing stuff. So the targeted policy, which is the default for Red Hat Enterprise Linux, expects web-based content to be in var www. So if you want to go somewhere else and put it in your own custom directory like /web, you're going to have to do some SELinuxy stuff to keep SE Linux turned on, but still permit your web server to access that other directory location that you've chosen. So to make things easy, do the default, right? Because then you don't have to worry about messing around some of the other subsystems with Red Hat Enterprise Linux just to get you going.
Well, and we've talked on the show before about the fact that by learning the defaults, your skills are much more transferable. So if you're consulting or if you move to a different business and you haven't learned the defaults, there's going to be a steeper learning curve trying to figure out where do things go, how are things configured. In all honesty, it's just easier to put things in the default space. That way, your knowledge is much more easily transferable.
Yeah. So Eric, one thing that we didn't have on the show notes, I'm just going to throw in here anyway, because why bother sticking to the plan? Is what about staging content into our existing web server that we've not configured, right? We did it earlier. We created this little index, but what if I actually already had an application that I just needed to put there? So
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Yeah, let me look up my handy dandy command.
What can possibly go wrong?
Right. So we're going to do a git clone of a little Java-based application, a JavaScript-based application, rather.
So while Scott grabs that, I forgot to mention this is the part of the show where if you've joined us live, go ahead and throw your questions into the chat. If you're catching us after the fact, as this is a holiday weekend, I just realized, feel free to put your questions in the comments, and we'll get back to those within a few days. You all are in for a treat today because Scott just downloaded a JavaScript-based game, and we get to watch him fail miserably live on air.
All right, so I downloaded this JavaScript-based game into my home directory. Right, we can see that there's a bunch of stuff underneath of it. And so all I'm doing is I'm recursively copying that clumsy bird directory over to my document root. Right, so now if I look in var www.html, right, there's our index. So somebody just puts in our server page, our server name. That's the page that's going to get served to them. And then we now also have a subdirectory called clumsy bird, which means if we do a different URL, server name / clumsy -bird, it's going to serve pages out of that subdirectory. So this, I said HTTPS. I meant HTTP. So there's the thing. And if I share my other browser, as I do the window sharing shuffle, right, here's the actual JavaScript running in my browser that is that thing that I just uploaded, right? So we can watch me be terrible at this. This game.
We did promise an epic fail.
Never claimed to be good at Twitch monkey video games, so.
And some free publicity for the Clumsy Bird open source game.
So I see Shantanu asked a question or said something about using rsync. So I did actually use copy on purpose because of SE Linux. So just, man, I swore I wasn't going to do this today, but I'm going to do it anyway. All right, so we can see that here when I cloned from GitHub.
We can't see.
Oh, it helps if I share the right tab. So I have Eric to keep me honest. All right, so I did an ls-z, and we can see here that the clumsy bird directory has an admin home type. And if we just took this and moved it over to our document root of our web server, SE Linux would actually keep that content from being shared. But because I copied it and created a new set of files under var www HTML, we can see that when the copy was made, it got the correct content type, and so Apache can share this content as part of its targeted policy. So you want to, when you're working with your web server and you're positioning content in there, you want to do something like copy, or Shantanu suggested rsync. That would also work because it actually creates new files at the target if they don't exist already. And those new files are going to get the correct SELinux context for where they're being placed. If you used a move to just like pick them up from one place and plop them down somewhere else, they would carry their SELinux context with them by default, which might be a mismatch for their new home. So copy, rsync, two great methods of getting content where you need it on your machine.
Another good use of Apache is using virtual host definitions. Basically, what we're looking to do is if we've got a web server that is public facing, it's got all the correct firewall rules, it's got all the correct SELinux policies, but we want to run more than one web domain on a single web server. We can actually do that by basically creating symbolic, not symbolic, but basically creating additional directories and pointing those through HTTPD configuration files.
Yeah, so we can take a look at the example that actually exists at the bottom of the main Apache configuration file, which is etc httpd conf httpd.conf. We just go down to the bottom here. Oh, it used to be at the very bottom, but it looks like it may be somewhere else now. There we go. Maybe. Oh, it looks like they may have removed it from the configuration file. Let me see if it's in the conf.d directory.
Oh, that might be.
I was going to show that as like special magic, super secret, experienced admin trick. Maybe the default is beating me to it. No, it doesn't, but we can create one in here anyway. All right, so we start with virtual host.
While Scott's typing this up, the one thing that we haven't shown is the fact that this is only one piece of the puzzle. The one of the other pieces that you'd have to include is work with the DNS provider, whether that's like Cloudflare or DigitalOcean, or a lot of my stuff is hosted out on like Namecheap. You'd have to have a public-facing DNS record that would take, in this case, myserver.com and direct it to the public IP address of your web server.
All right, so this is a very minimal virtual host configuration. Basically, what it says is when traffic comes into a host name called myserver.com or www.myserver.com, instead of getting the normal content in var www HTML, we should instead serve web pages out of this other directory location. And what that means is that you can load your system up with DNS references so that to the outside world, it could be 30 or 40 or 50 different host names, but they're all going to the same actual system. But when they hit that actual system, it'll serve content out of different directories on it, so that it still maintains that appearance of being multiple different properties. And this is what web hosting companies have done for like a gajillion years, is provided you essentially a directory where you could put all your web content. and then they do the DNS stuff to make sure that your host name goes to your directory of web content, but they don't actually have to dedicate additional server hardware to service your domain, right? Essentially just some directory space where you can put your HTML files and scripts and Java stuff that you want your website to be serving through their service provider. Some additional things that we could do here, we could bind to specific ports. So we could make virtual hosts active only when traffic is received on certain ports, but not other ports. We could also do things like separate out the logs for this virtual host somewhere else, which is really handy in that web hosting provider standpoint, because if somebody puts some JavaScript things and it's not working properly, they want to know the logs for their JavaScript things. And as we have this configured currently, the logs from this virtual host would be lumped in with all of our web server logs. So we can instead isolate error logs and access logs to a specific file that's unique to this web content. So if there's a problem, or we're interested in like how many hits we get or from where, we do analytics on them, we can store them in a separate file so that they're segregated, and it makes it easy to provide upon request.
So it may surprise folks to know that Apache HTTPD was pretty much, this may be overgeneralizing, but it was pretty much the original web server when it comes to Linux. But it's not the only one, and the newer web server, the one that's been gaining a lot of traction over the last several years, is actually nginx. Nginx is touted as a smaller footprint, smaller code base, newer. It's a newer code base for sure. But nginx tends to scale a little bit better than Apache. Also, nginx has additional modules, basically functionality that you can plug into nginx and get a little bit more juice out of your web server. Things like load balancing and reverse proxy. What you looking at?
Oh, I was just pulling up to see how big these were in memory. So they're roughly what? It's okay. They're roughly about a meg-ish each in RAM usage. All right, carry on, Eric.
I got sidetracked looking at what Scott was doing. So all in all, nginx is a little bit newer, and to an unmeasurable sense, it's a little bit more cloud and container friendly. In fact, my home lab is running nginx in a Podman container, and I've got a few websites here that I host, mostly for internal use or just playing around. But I also use the reverse proxy quite a bit to, like Scott was alluding to, like my personal website and a couple of other sites that I manage all point to my home's public IP address, and then my router directs that to my virtual RHEL 9 host that then directs that traffic into my Podman container, and it's distributed out from there. So why don't we go ahead and install nginx? First thing we'll want to do is we'll want to stop the Apache service. So we'll use systemctl stop HTTPD. And from there, we'll do a DNF install on nginx. Oh, yep. I want to disable the service as well so it doesn't come up on reboot.
Hey, Eric, while we're installing nginx, so we got version 1.20, it looks like, right here. But this is a Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9 system.
Read my mind. So we actually have application streams available in RHEL 8, and they are coming to they're coming to RHEL 9 come version 9.1. So here in a couple of months, you'll actually have application streams available. We'll have a link to an episode that we talked about application streams on this show. But just know that that allows you to pick basically the velocity at which you want to have to update your workloads. So you can pick one of the longer supported nginx versions, and you can basically decide when you move to a newer version by selecting which module is active for nginx. Nginx and Apache are both supported packages within Red Hat, so they're available within the RHEL repos. Something else we didn't mention earlier on. Okay, so we've got nginx installed. So let's go ahead and do a systemctl start or enable tac now. I like to do the enable just because I don't want to have to reboot my server and then go, oh, I forgot to enable that, so it didn't come up on reboot. So now we've actually switched our active web server from Apache to nginx, but they use the same ports.
So that's why we had to stop Apache.
Yes.
Because it was already bound to port 80 and port 443. And if we're running Apache and then we tried to turn on nginx, nginx wouldn't be able to get a hold of those ports.
And also that also means that since we've already configured Apache on the system and ports 80 and 443, we don't have to do anything additional for nginx. But if you take just a vanilla RHEL 9 machine, install and you install nginx just clean out of the box, you will have to go through and make sure that your firewall and SE Linux configurations are set properly.
Our lab environment died because we started it too early, apparently. So bear with me as I reprovision it and reinstall nginx and re-enable it.
And we'll have to actually go in and demonstrate that we need to add firewall commands and double check our SE Linux policies.
What did go wrong? One note to return to our conversation we're having about application streams in nginx. So based on the history of applications with streams with nginx, we're getting one application stream for it roughly every year. So when RHEL 8 was released, I want to say that we shipped nginx 1.12 and 1.14, but then we shipped 1.16, 1.18, and 1.20 is now available there as well. So you can choose how quickly you would like to upgrade to a newer version of nginx. Also, Eric, I know you love dad jokes. So do you know how the Apache web server got its name?
I think I did at one point, but do tell.
So Apache is not the original HTTPD service. There was another one that came before it. And what happened was the Apache Foundation started by writing patches to that other web server process. And they wrote so many patches that it was Apache web server. And that's how they named their project. And then Apache version 2, they actually did a complete rewrite of the web service on a new code base. So it was no longer Apache web server. It was a freshly written web server, but the name stuck around.
All in all, that is not the worst open source naming story I've ever heard. I do love dad jokes, and I do love how different projects end up getting their name. My favorite are properly recursive acronyms.
Like GNU?
Yeah, like GNU. Okay, so we've got nginx installed on our refreshed lab environment, and you notice that Cockpit is actually the only service that's allowed through the firewall at this time. So as we hinted to at the beginning of the show, we need to add services for HTTP, and then you'll need to add a second -- add service for HTTPS. You can do that twice or as one command. And then you'll want to add the permanent argument so that survives a reboot or a restart of the firewall service. Oh yeah, that's right, because this one already comes pre-installed with Apache.
I think we're back up and going. Let me just double check.
Yay! So we're running short on time. So why don't we do a quick comparison of nginx and Apache? That way, if you want to get started, you can kind of be at the same place with either web service. The first thing to point out is, much like Apache, the configuration file for nginx is in the etc nginx directory, and the main file that you'll want to work with is nginx.conf. And from here, we can actually scroll down a ways. It's probably about halfway down the configuration file. We can see where the document root is within nginx, which is actually under user share nginx HTML. So that's a little bit different than Apache. So that's worth noting. One of the other things worth noting is actually just a few lines above, you actually see an include statement for etc nginx conf.d. So we can add, this is where we can go in and configure some of the other modules within nginx. And much like the conf.d directory, we a few lines down below that is default.d. So this is very much like this is nginx is already sort of predisposed to having what Apache calls virtual hosts. So we can set up multiple different domains. And to do that, you can actually separate out your configurations per domain and just give them a .conf extension within the default.d. So etc nginx is by default looking in that default.d directory. So you can have my website.conf, my second website.conf, and you can put those into the default.d directory and get access to that. Yeah, and Scott just brought up a good point that because nginx and Apache share the same SE Linux contexts, you can actually just go in and change the nginx configuration to point to var www html, and it will still be allowed through SE Linux. You'll just need to remember to make that modification to the SE nginx.conf file, and do you can do an nginx a systemctl nginx or reload nginx. And the nice thing about that is nginx will actually not stop running. It'll just grab the new configuration and put that in live. So you, at most, you might miss a ping or so as the new configuration is loaded in.
Yeah, Eric, I was showing you the SE Linux context on user share nginx. So it's got the right SE Linux context that you could stick with the default configuration if you're interested, because it's got the right context to permeate the SE Linux policy. Or if you want to manage it the way that you've done your Apache, or you're moving from Apache to nginx, then yeah, you can change the configuration to get your content where you want it.
So what were we 1 meg on?
Yeah,
No.
we're 1 meg per Apache, and we are about 13K per nginx. So we're saying that they were smaller, that you could scale better because they're smaller. So here you go. It's actually significantly different.
And I think development is still very, very active as far as nginx. I think Apache has slowed down a little bit, but again, that's kind of up to personal preference and kind of your needs. Scott, anything else to say about web servers before we wrap?
No, if you want to know more about like a deeper dive in either of these, go ahead and add it to the comments that you'd like to see that. And we'll see about adding an additional episode on those if need be. Eric, what do we have coming up next week?
So I didn't mention this, but this episode is the first in a number of episodes that we're doing on running workloads on top of RHEL. So we spent the first 38 episodes talking about RHEL, about getting started with command line, users, security, patches, that kind of thing. So we're going to do a series of episodes of you have this RHEL box and it's running awesome and it's secure and you have usernames, that kind of thing. Now what do I do with it? So today we talked about building a web server, and next week join us as we dive into the world of databases, which Scott and I know very little about, but it'll work out. What could possibly go wrong? So if you liked this content, please give us a thumbs up and share with a friend. We work hard every week to make sure that we bring you fresh content and that we cover topics that are applicable to all of you as systems administrators or developers. And definitely hit that subscribe button. We've got tech tip videos that come out sporadically. We've got this show every Friday, and we've also got RHEL Presents every other Wednesday. Join us next week, in fact, as Brian Smith and myself are interviewing a couple of folks from Microsoft. We'll be talking about Red Hat Enterprise Linux on Azure. So always something going on around RHEL. Also follow us on Twitter at RHEL. I think that's all the CTAs. So join us next week, same time, same channel for Enter the Terminal, episode 40. Can't believe that. But we'll be talking about deploying databases. Until then, on behalf of Scott McBrien, myself, and the entire Red Hat Enterprise Linux team, thank you all so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon.